What's up guys, Loom here. Welcome back to the channel, and thank you for tuning in. With patch 11.1 on the horizon, time is running out to get your Feat of Strength, Let Me Solo Him, and your Delve Dirigibles Void Skin. So I'll be sharing all of the general knowledge I've collected while defeating Zekvir across 12 classes, all at a relatively low item level. I do have guides posted for every class, with the exception of Evoker. Links are in the description, of course. We'll see if I get Evoker before the end of the week. This video will help serve the specs that I didn't cover and act as a supplemental guide to the specs I did cover, as I've picked up additional information, strategies, and viewpoints while progressing through each of the 12 classes that I have completed. Before we continue with the video, be sure to subscribe to the channel to stay in the loop for Season 2, Delve Boss videos, Mage Tower guides for every spec in the game, and to catch me live on YouTube. If this video or any of the previous ones have helped you out, give this video a like and let me know about it in the comments. I have the best comment section on YouTube. I wake up every morning with incredibly motivating feedback. Thank you all so much. Please keep it up. The most important advice I feel I can give you is that you cannot become frustrated with dying. You should not only be okay with it, you should embrace it. Every wipe is one step closer towards victory, assuming you can figure out what went wrong. Sometimes some lame things can happen. There is RNG to this fight, but you are largely in control of it. Throwing our hands up and saying that this is dumb or unfair can certainly be soothing at times, but it will not help you moving forward, and moving forward is the only path towards victory. Yes, it stinks when Brann just gets kicked out of the room and the fight resets. Brann can have aggro and get feared out of the room or just run out of the room like a coward. Brann can be preoccupied with rapid fire and not able to dispel you in time. Being struck with a critical melee attack is unfortunate. Being struck with 2 in a row is super unlikely, also unfortunate. These things can happen. These things have all happened to me, more times than I can count. As with much of WoW, knowledge is power. Experience is the best way to gather that knowledge. And sometimes that experience is negative. You just hit release spirit and you go again. And giving this or any of my other videos a watch will help you get started on your own path forward. Let's get down to business. Preparation is very important for this fight. If you walk in with boosted greens, no gems, no enchants, and no consumables, you're going to be shooting yourself in the foot. And while that can be fun, we don't have much time to keep shooting ourselves in the foot, do we? I strongly recommend using the DPS spec for this fight and letting Brann heal. If you're looking to tank Zekvir, you're likely to still have a tough time surviving, and you're going to be lacking that damage that you need to deal with every egg spawn. Possible exception being Prot Paladin. The health values of the egg cocoons do vary based on the role composition you bring to the fight. Brann only has access to his dispel and floor potions as a healer, and he'll only interrupt the spittle as a DPS. While an interrupt on every spittle might seem like a good trade-off, his priority damage is severely lacking. He'll often not switch quickly or appropriately to the egg, which can lead to a big problem if you're counting on him to do any of that damage. He'll never interrupt the heal unless you're playing Disc or Holy Priest, as those specs don't have an interrupt of their own. Regardless of the specs you choose, the relics you want Brann to use are the Amorphous Relic, which grants one of 2 buffs. The Massive buff gives you 20% more health and 12% more damage. The Mini buff gives you 20% movement speed and 12% haste. Either buff is fine, though you might find a little more comfort in the health increase. It's just a 50% chance on which one you get whenever you enter combat. I strongly urge that your second relic be the Unbreakable Iron Idol. When brought below 40% health, this thing will fall from the sky and taunt Zekvir, taking 1 or 2, possibly more melees off of the table. You can also target it with a Claw Smash. I wouldn't count on it. And the idol can and will proc more often than the 2-minute cooldown indicated on the tooltip. If you really feel like you don't need it, then you should use the Porcelain Arrowhead Idol. This will periodically give you 50% more chance to crit through a debuff on the target. It's not up all the time and not necessarily reliable to get it on the egg itself, but it will be more damage output, certainly across the course of a 5 to 8 minute fight. In my opinion, additional movement speed is one of the most overlooked yet beneficial things you can bring to the fight. Enchanting your cloak and bracers with the highest movement speed enchants will get you close to 10% movement speed, and using an elusive Blasphemite gem along with 5 uniquely colored War Within gems will get you an extra 10% movement speed. This is not reflected on your character sheet, but is absolutely there and will stack with any enchant or class talent that gives you additional movement speed. Keep in mind you can have a guaranteed of 6 sockets through your neck and 2 rings using Magnificent Jeweler settings, which is exactly the number of sockets you need to get the highest benefit of the Blasphemite unique gem combo. You will not be missing the leech on your cloak and bracers. It's simply not enough healing to deal with the incoming damage at any point in this fight. If you're playing a strength or agility class, I would trade out your Stormbound armor kit on your legs for a defender's armor kit. This replaces the stamina with armor. We may be splitting hairs here, but the armor will give you value on every melee attack you receive. You're only going to see the value reflected in the increased stamina if you take your whole health bar's worth of damage at once, and at which point, rip bozo anyway. Consumables, versatility flask, even if it's not your best stat. Algari mana oil. Once you know you can get past 60% health, entering phase 2, start using augment runes if you have them. If you're a mana class, you can actually get a free food buff from Brann. That's going to be better than anything else. If you drop below 70% mana while out of combat, which just takes a couple of flash heals, you will drop the feast. It'll give you a 10-minute buff, 5% main stat. If you're not a class with mana, enjoy your own feasts, or let me know in the comments how you can get Brann to drop that for you. If you have a friend that wants to group up with you, enter, run himself out of mana, have the feast drop, and then leave, that might work too. Important to know, there is no enrage timer on Zekvir. The only rush you should be in is to quickly dispense an egg before it hatches, or getting rid of the ad after it does hatch before it can web blast you. The most difficult phase is phase 1, the first 40% of the fight, as Zekvir will have way more opportunities to melee you. Phase 2 adds a very long channel to his ability list, which actually severely reduces the amount of melees he can get off on you. On the subject of melee attacks, he can critically strike you. A critical strike will top out at about 4 million damage, though it will likely be a little bit less, but if you're going to drop under 4 million, that's when you want to step on your next potion, or use a defensive, or run away a little bit, or do something. Death Knights and Warlocks can become crit immune to Zekvir through a class talent for Death Knight, and Amplified Curse of the Satyr on Warlock through a Hellcaller talent. Every other spec that is not a tank is subject to 3% crit. Back-to-back critical melee attacks, while they can happen, are super unlikely. If you see it happen to you once, you've probably rolled your bad luck there, and it's not going to happen again. The most important thing to consider when trying to survive the incoming melee attacks are the potions that Brann will toss on the floor and timing their use. Definitely don't run over 2 at a time, and once you get used to being hit in the face by Zekvir, try not to use even 1 until you've dropped below 4 million health. Zekvir has a 2-second swing timer that can actually be slowed by rogue poisons, the Warlock Curse, and a Death Knight talent. Death Knights are absolutely the tankiest class in the game against Zekvir. You will often just be following the pattern of getting hit, stepping on a potion, getting hit, stepping on a potion, getting hit, stepping on a potion. The potions come out about every 30 seconds. Keep in mind that if you wipe and pull very quickly, that potion cooldown might not be back up for Brann, so it's a good idea to wait at least 30 seconds between pulls, also to help collect yourself and evaluate what went wrong. It's also important to consider that your character can dodge incoming melee attacks, but not while casting. Sometimes just keeping him in front of you and using instant cast attacks will keep you alive until your next potion, defensive, or casted ability by Zekvir buys you some breathing room. Elemental and Resto Shamans and Holy Paladins should absolutely be using a shield. This will give you nearly 10% extra damage reduction to the incoming melee attacks, and a 10% chance to block, although you are going to block 40% of that incoming damage. Sacrificing damage for survival is a big lesson in this fight. Your damage does not matter, assuming you can deal with the eggs. Death striking yourself, spam healing, sitting in defensive stance, bear forming, or regularly creating some distance between you and Zekvir will all add up in the end. Using your actual defensive buttons is important, but you should not overlap them, and you should try to identify when you don't actually need to use them. It's also important to keep in mind that if you do let a cocoon hatch, the fight is not over. The ad that spawns will cast a web blast on you that does a ton of damage and stun you. If this doesn't outright kill you, Brann might be able to dispel you out of it if his dispel is available, but you likely want that dispel for the spittle. My recommendation is when an ad spawns, disrupt that web blast with something other than your interrupt, which you're going to want to save or have just recently used on the boss's heal. And once you've disrupted the web blast, you're going to want to run to the front door or the back door in an attempt to line of sight the web blast that will be recasted as you didn't use an actual interrupt. If you're not behind line of sight by the time the cast ends, you're going to get hit, even if you are behind the line of sight by the time the projectile actually reaches you. Once that web blast has been successfully cast, you will have enough time, hopefully, to finish off the ad and reorient yourself to proceed with the fight. If you're absolutely having to make the decision between eating a web blast and letting the boss heal, the web blast will likely kill you, the heal will not. The next most dangerous portion of the fight is the Enfeebling Spittle. which is one of the more focused on aspects of the fight because each class and maybe even spec has different ways of dealing with it, or not if you're a dragon. If you don't prevent the application of the dot or immediately remove it, it's highly unlikely you're going to heal through it without multiple defensive cooldowns and potions, unless you're a Death Knight with appropriate talents and Death Strike spam. Brann's Dispel is a 1-minute cooldown, which can lead to a lot of confusion as to why he didn't dispel you at any given point in the fight. You can track Brann's Dispel cooldown on his default character portrait, a weak aura, or using your healing frames. The spell ID is 433621. That said, even while available, he may not immediately dispel you, which can be problematic. If he's dead, he's obviously not going to dispel you. If he's out of range, he's not going to dispel you. If he's casting rapid fire, he is not going to dispel you. If he's feared, he's not going to use it on you. What he will do is if you get the debuff and his dispel is available, he will queue that up, so to speak. Meaning, his dispel is available, you get the debuff, you clear your debuff, and he says, I'm coming with that dispel. He uses it, and it gets put on cooldown. Very frustrating thing to have happen. A 1-minute cooldown dispel means he's only going to be good for 1 out of every 3. He could technically dispel you once, you get the next one, and he would get the third one, but not until about 10 seconds into the dot's duration, at which point you're already dead. And certainly by that point, he has backed up his dispelled where he will not be getting you in the next 2, if that makes sense. There is a lesser known tool that Brann has to help you with the dispel. If you have Aegis of Ironforge on you, it's a buff granted by Brann that's 20% damage reduction and grants you immunity to CC effects. That will prevent the application of the dot. It looks like a fancy power word shield on you and has this shield icon for the buff. You can line of sight Enfeebling Spittle. It's kind of hard to do. The talented Rogue Hookshot is a very good example of being able to quickly get behind a corner. And on that note, you can actually line of sight the Claw Smash and the Fear Stomp, but not Angler's Web. And after those options, you're left with your class toolkit. Some classes just have an ability that removes snares and has a short enough CD to be used for everyone. Freedom for Paladins, Vengeful Retreat, Post Haste for Hunters, Form Shifting for Druids. Often you're going to be adding a snare break functionality to an ability that you already have through a class or hero talent. Energized Barriers for Mages, Phantasm Modifying Fade for Priests, Relentless Pursuit in the Slayer Tree for Warriors, Thunderous Pause for Shaman. And some classes like Shaman and Monk have multiple solutions that they can pick and choose from. Some, like Warlock, only have one. The Spittle cooldown is 25 seconds, adding about a second for the cast time. This means classes with a 30-second or longer solution can be a little tricky. Warlocks, Warriors, Death Knights, Rogues all require you to be mindful of the dispel, although as we said earlier, Death Knights are pretty tanky. Rogue is a good example of having multiple options, but the primary option, Vanish, is an awful ability to use. Even if you're quick to get back in combat, the boss can reset, especially if Brann is on his Griffin throwing hammers. He's technically untargetable, and so a Vanish or invisibility effect will immediately reset the fight. This is frustrating. In my Rogue video, I actually bought a PvP trinket and used Line of Sight quite a bit. Also good to keep in mind, Rogues can use Numbing Poison. Warlocks can use Curse of the Satyr to slow the casting speed. For Rogues, this allows you to line of sight a little easier. And for Warlock, this allows you a little bit less of a gap between the second Enfeebling Spittle coming out and being able to teleport it off with your 30-second cooldown teleport. Evoker is just the worst class in the game at this fight. I will reserve my comments about piloting that class in general and how frustrating it can be. Evokers only have one long cooldown option, or 2 if you're Preservation, for dealing with the Spittle and removing or preventing that dot. They're also pretty slow. Getting behind a corner for LOS is pretty difficult. Claw Smash, while a pretty simple idea, a frontal cone, the closer you are, the easier it is to dodge. Zekvir uses it in a 4D chess kind of way that can leave you feeling a little silly when you get creamed by it. A favorite combo of his is spawning the egg and then hitting you with that wide cone, leaving you little recourse other than going back in time and playing the situation a little differently. For this reason, you generally want to keep Zekvir in the middle of the room. Also, if he's on one far side, he's going to spawn the egg on the far opposite side, exacerbating that exact problem. If you're using DBM or bigwig timers, this is a little easier to calculate. But when an egg is spawned, if you haven't seen the Claw Smash in the last 10 seconds, you're likely going to see it queued up. But a good idea is to make your way towards the egg, but take an indirect route. And so that you can cut back in towards the middle a little bit and make your way towards the egg without losing too much uptime. This is clearly more of a problem for melee tunes, but I've seen plenty of ranged players make their way towards the egg a little bit, which you don't need to be doing if you don't need to do it. If you're ranged, do your best to sit in the middle of the room, keep Zekvir in the middle of the room. You can also run straight through him if he queues up the claw smash and you're in melee range. If you are melee, when the egg is spawned, you can see this by a white thing that is launched from Zekvir that ultimately becomes the egg. Once you see this thing launch and where the egg is going to be, you can kind of shuffle Zekvir a little bit closer to the egg, which makes the whole dodging process a little bit easier and can aid with cleaving the boss and the egg at the same time. Ranged, it's mostly about discipline and not moving from the middle of the room if you don't have to. Then you have Angler's Web. This thing will take you out as quickly as Enfeebling Spittle will, but as it's avoidable, you should probably do that. Best case scenario, Brann will immediately dispel you of this dot, sending you up the creek without a paddle for the next Spittle. And now we have his least dangerous ability, but most frustrating at times, his heal. Every spec besides Healing Priest has an interrupt that they need to be using to interrupt this spell. If you're a Holy or Disc Priest, you can have Brann as a DPS and he will actually kick this spell. There are no other scenarios where you're going to see Brann interrupt the heal. He also kicks it super quick, like a scrub DPS. The heal getting off in phase 1 is only a 10% heal, in phase 2 it's a 25% heal, and again, this doesn't end your run. I often see comments and have experienced myself that you let the heal go off, you lose your composure, and then you die to some other mechanic. Don't let this happen. It's going to take longer to wipe and repull the boss than it is just to continue with the fight, especially in phase 2. A 25% heal is really big, but phase 2 is rather easy to deal with. I've talked about this a little bit. Phase 2 at 60% does add a couple things to the fight. One of them is a very long channel. This actually severely reduces the amount of melees that he will hit you with, making phase 2 quite a bit easier than phase 1, assuming you can dodge. His heal increases to 25% of his max health. Angler's Web is now accompanied by blue portals that transfer the web between them and require additional dodging or just moving away from the giant clump of portals. The clump of portals is rarely an issue, but if you're a melee DPS and he's put the clump of portals on top of an egg spawn or close to it, it can make things kind of difficult. Precise movement with the camera pointed straight down at you is the best way to deal with these. Horrendous Roar, the giant purple fear stompy, will become Infinite Horror, which seems to cast like a 1/10 of a second faster and shoots out blue energy balls in 4 equidistant directions. When you're moving out, you also need to make sure you're not going to be hit in the face with one of these balls. The longer you spend progressing in phase 1, the tougher it'll be to make this adjustment, but ultimately it's a pretty visible mechanic. Unending Spines is a long channel I talked about. He does a wind up and then a channel down, spawning swirlies kind of all over the map, many of which will follow your feet. About halfway through the channel down, they will stop spawning, meaning if you're ranged, you can just plant your feet and get back to it. If you're melee, it's whatever, you can move or not move. It's probably not an issue for you. That damage, while it looks like it's a rock, it's going to be nature damage. You can't bop your way out of it. Paladins. And you might say, hey Loom, I'm an Evoker. What gives? I'll give it a shot. I've been playing a lot of Classic lately, so I'm probably pretty bad at the game. But my plan for Evoker is the following. Evoker actually has crazy good damage for the eggs. I'm not worried about that at all. You're going to have Fire Breath and Enkindle, I think is the name of the fire-based hero talent. And while Scale Commander has an increased damage to Disintegrate, it definitely has the damage for the eggs as well. But this talent, Draconic Instincts, makes me really feel like I'm just going to progress with this talent set. You have a small chance of healing yourself for 30% of damage taken. This occurs more often on attacks that deal a high amount of damage. This is just passively a lot of extra healing, or rather damage prevention. There's also Trailblazer, which increases hover and deep breath's travel speed by 40%. And increases the lunge distance of hover by 40%. I have a feeling that this is going to be how I'm going to get behind some walls. Personally, I wish hover were like a 10-second shorter CD, just to help deal with it. Worst case scenario, we double healer it with Brann on Monday night just to get the kill. I think I'll be able to get it as DPS. For the Spittle order, it'll be kind of similar to Death Knight, with the exception that I'm not going to be able to heal myself through it. Renewing Blades does not heal fast enough, even if you're talented to the 4-second version of it. So we're going to hope we have Aegis of Ironforge on us. If that's the case, it's going to prevent the application. If that's not up, we're going to have Brann dispel it. And if the dispel isn't available, we're going to use our Deep Breath. If we don't have Deep Breath available, we're going to be line of sighting the best we can. We'll see how it goes. It might be a 30-minute fight. Maybe even we'll kick every third Spittle and just let the boss heal and see how that goes. Who knows? Ultimately, this is the final week we can get the achievement. It is doable by any spec in the game. You don't need a maxed out item level or fully decked out Brann to do it. You don't need specific trinkets. You don't need anything. Above all else, it will take attempts. More for some, less for others. Find your resolve. Fix UI and gameplay errors as you encounter them. Reach out for help if needed. And most importantly, try to find the fun in all this. If you're not having fun, it's okay not to complete the fight. If you're a player desperately trying to earn everything you can in the game, and this is the moment where you transcend that attitude, I believe you will have found more value than if you had completed the challenge. This game became so much more to me once I stopped doing things I didn't want to do for rewards I didn't really need. As always, I appreciate your time. I hope you have a great rest of your day, evening, and week. See you in the next patch. Peace.